Well,
Okay,
still.
great. So, okay, first of all, self-introduction. My name is Bing Song. I'm a Senior Vice President of Berggruen Institute and the Director of the Institute's China Center. And here is Professor Yamagiwa. He's an eminent primatologist and anthropologist based in Japan, Kyoto. So our conversation in the next 45 minutes, we're going to try to reset the conceptual frameworks and notions on what it means to be human in the planetary age. So we talked a lot about the planetary, and then somebody asked questions in the morning sessions about planetary identity. Really, I mean, to make us truly planetary in thinking and action, it is important to reset our conceptual frameworks and notions. That's what we attempt to do in this session. It's very ambitious. It's a tall order for sure. But we hope to introduce cross-species perspectives on what might have gone awry in human evolution, and also different approaches for conceptualizing human nature. So in this conversation, I mean, first of all, maybe I will ask Professor Yamagiwa to share what he has learned about human nature and human evolution from his studies of other primates. He's an expert on gorillas, okay? So perhaps, we'll start with that and then see what we can learn from other species.
Okay. First of all, I would like to point out your misunderstanding on the history of human evolution. We human beings have larger brains, 3 times larger than gorillas. So what do you think? When and why human brain increase in size? Maybe many people believe that language is a cause to increase brain in size, but it is wrong. When human brain started to increase in size 2 million years ago, Homo erectus, Homo habilis. But at that time, our ancestor did not speak language. Language appeared about 70 to 100,000 years ago. It's very recently. And when the brain size reached to that of the human, modern human size, about 40,000 years ago. 400,000 years ago. So it's far long away. So what was the reason? Yes, enlargement of brain size produced language. Not language produced large human brain size. So why and when and how? British primatologist Robin Dunbar postulated a new hypothesis that, all the primatologists searched the cause to increase brain size in comparison with non-human primates. And Dunbar found that the most good parameter correlated to brain size is the group size. So social complexity was the cause to increase brain size. So at 2 million years ago, he estimated that human average group size was about 30. So it's almost double of gorillas' group size. So average group size of gorillas is 15 individuals. And modern humans' brain size, how many individuals is fit to this brain size, about 150 people. That is the upper limit of modern humans to trust the others. So that is the social capital for us to keep the intimate relationships, to trust and rely neighbors. That is a very good point of view. So language did not contribute to increase in brain size, nor increase in group size. And please remember that after the emergence of agriculture and pastoralism, our society has increased gradually in group size. But our brain size did not increase. So what's happened? That's I would like to question to you, ask you. You will find solution or good answer during my speech, I hope. And another misunderstanding is human nature is violent and preference of war. That's people believe that, and especially many politicians believe that. But, you know, I would like to ask you, have you seen the famous movie, King Kong? You can raise a hand. Oh yeah, many people have already seen. And yes, as you see, gorillas was described. No, King Kong is, you know, the symbol of violence, and its model was gorillas. But it is not true. We have studied on gorillas for more than 40 years, and we found that they are very peaceful, more peaceful than human beings. So, if it is true, our ancestors were not violent. Violence and war appeared in the process of our human evolutionary history. When prehistorian archaeologists, many scholars tried to find the evidence of war in the history of human evolution, but they only found the evidence just before or just around the appearance of agriculture and pastoralism. So about 10,000 years ago. Before that, in the majority of human evolution, there was no war, no violence at all. So we were peaceful. Our ancestors were peaceful. It is true. And you can see, yes, have you seen the other movies? Planet of Apes. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Gorillas were described as foolish and violent. It is not true. And I would like to remind you that in the old movie titled 2001, A Space Odyssey. Have you seen that? Good, thank you very much. But the story of that movie is wrong. You know, theme of this movie is, you know, now space is judging the original sin of human being. So what is original sin? It's violence and war. And it occurred in all times in old human ancestors. That is the story. Do you remember that the beginning of the movie, it's titled Before Dawn. That's, you know, after leaving tropical rainforest, human ancestor was, wandering in savanna. And when they are sleeping together, rectangle shape material landed in front of them. It's called monolith. And it gave human ancestor a thinking power. And one of the ancestors tried to think about O. And he picked up the giraffe bones and to think about, okay, this can be the hunting tool. And he actually used it. And he became hero in the group. And later, his group fought with another group over small pond. Because in savannah, water is very important for everyone. And he thought again, okay, this tool can be used for fighting. And he started to use it to fight and to chase the other group. And he succeeded in doing that. So that is the original thing of human being. And such story was based on the discovery of Raymond Dart, who is very famous prehistorian anthropologist. And he discovered the evidence of human ancestor. It's called Australopithecus africanus, just 2 million years ago. And he discovered a peculiar hole on the skull. And he saw that it was the evidence for fighting with each other by Australopithecus africanus. So that is clearly show us war originated in old times as a human ancestors. But after that, many prehistorians and archaeologists tried to discover the evidences of war, but they couldn't. Just as I told you, only recently human beings started to fight. Violence and war appeared very recently. It is not human nature. It is not human's thing, original thing. So it is wrong. Our ancestors were peaceful. And recently, we started to use violence and to start to fight between nation and nation. So such result, how do you think about that? How do you use this result for the future? That is my question. And, okay, I respected the founder of Japanese primatology, and he said about 70 years ago, the structure and function of this world are originally differentiated and generated from one. Therefore, all living and non-living things have the harmonious relationships to coexist together on the planet. So I followed this, and I thought that is true in my long experience to study on wild gorillas.
Thank you for this wonderful review of the major findings of some of your research. In fact, to try to correct some misunderstandings about who we are as humans. I think the comment that you made about this sort of oneness in scientific thinking really has a lot of resonance in me. At the Institute, when we were thinking about the planetary, we were just, as you guys know, that we are very much into the sort of questioning and revisiting foundational notions that actually undergirds our human society. One such notion in question would be clearly what it means to be an individual. I think this morning's sessions, actually, people also covered this as well. So as we all know, the modern notion of the individual, we view individual as an independent, self-contained, and autonomous agent, right? This is the core notion that pretty much all of us subscribe to. And then obviously this notion emphasizes separateness and then self-containment, right? And then this notion really forms the basis for most of the modern values, institutions, and the practices that we see around us, regardless whether or not it's from the West or the East, okay? So for this, revisiting this kind of notions, and then I've written articles about it, and it's in that book as well. And then we want to introduce a concept, we call it co-becoming. In fact, it came from the words in Chinese, we say 共生. In Japanese, it's kyosei. It's exactly two same characters that, that refers to a world view, which refers to like the world is consisting of mutual embeddedness and co-generating entities. Okay, so this, this same word 共生 or kyosei is used to translate symbiosis in life science, but we don't want to translate this word into symbiosis because we don't want people confuse this concept with the symbiosis in life sciences. Instead, we translate into co-becoming. And then if I unpack this a little bit, the mutual embeddedness and the mutual constitutive nature of this worldview really speaks to the relationship between human beings and human beings and the non-human beings as well, including organic and inorganic forms of being. It's very much echoing what Imanishi-san said about this oneness, and in fact that also includes organic and inorganic things. And again, I know it's Christine in the morning also made some comments, and then it's really echoing what we were trying to talk about it here. When we look at the foundations of this concept of co-becoming, the number of intellectual sort of foundations for that in the East Asian context. I would say the first one, I would just say this notion about the unity of, or actually the sort of the oneness of myriad things, oneness of everything. This one is essentially, if you look at the sort of Taoist tradition, and Tao is the ultimate source of all creations, right? So in a way, this oneness speaks to the same origin of all forms of beings, human beings, creatures, animals, and then even inorganic things, right? So we are all derivatives of the same Tao. So we actually, all of us have same origin. So that's actually sort of, it's one of the underlying concepts for the oneness from a certainly conceptual or philosophical point of view. And then another source of intellectual traditions actually we draw upon is it's Buddhist related, and then it's the codependent origination. For that one, it essentially says that all things exist or come into being because of some other conditions. Everything is conditional, right? Except Nirvana, obviously, the ultimate kind of truth. Except this, everything that we see around us, it's actually it's conditional. And then so, in a way, this kind of a concept speaks to the complexity of the realities, and then it make you think about those multiple levels of realities and multiple possibilities. And it clearly also talks about the relationality, which was also mentioned this morning as well. Relationality not just between human beings and also among all forms of beings as well. So this is kind of the that's why we've been talking about the concept of co-becoming. We hope to use this concept to challenge and enrich the modern notion of individual. And then, with this mutual embeddedness, with this co-generating traits of this whole world that we're inhabiting, and then, clearly that we can draw some ethical implications, and then we can, think really in planetary terms, which we'll come to admit in the later part of the discussion. So now I sort of just quickly run through some of the conceptual oneness to try to echo what the Professor Yamagiwa was talking about, the oneness in the scientific setting. I'm actually just also curious, we've come a long way, right, already. And obviously we cannot go back to this 150-person hunter-gatherer society anymore. And then so what advice would you have for us? Like, what would be the future direction of the human evolution? I know you talked about the second nomadic age concept. I thought that was fascinating. So could you share that with us?
Yes, as I told you, we can return to the age of hunter-gatherers. But, at present day, we heavily rely on logic thinking with language. So we forgot to interact with non-human animals, plants, anything else in the living things. But still, present hunter-gatherers can have the ability to communicate with them, and they use empathy. So before language, before starting agriculture and pastoralism, we used musical communication.
Musical
Communication. Because language, has a meaning, every time meaning. But, musical communication has no meaning. But they transmit emotion. And to share the other's emotion is very important characteristics of human beings. And we can share the other animals' emotion. So you can imagine that when you talk to your dogs and your cats or your domestic animals, you can use language, but they can't understand your language, your speaking. But you can share the feeling with domestic animals. And it also happens in the case of wild animals. I use my passion, my feeling, to communicate with wild gorillas, and it succeeded. So don't forget, we can use the musical communication with feeling. We inherited the five senses from other non-human primates, like monkeys and apes. We use the same sense, but we rely on visual and auditory sense. And it's produced our society. But don't forget the other three senses, olfactory and taste and touch, that can make us friendly manner and give us trust. That is very important for us still. So, modern technology has increased our power with visual cues and auditory cues, such as internet and smartphones. But we still use the other three senses to get the trustful relationships with others. So that is very important things for us to make the trustful society, even as present and especially for future, I guess.
But the three freedoms that you
Sure.
emphasize that will help us to build second
That's right.
nomadic age, what would that be?
In comparison with the society of gorillas, I think that human society has three kinds of freedoms. One is moving freedom. The second is gathering freedom. And the third is conversation freedom. And yes, those freedoms, expanded by modern technology. Okay, but if we make mistake in using such modern technology, then dystopia will come. So I'm afraid about that. The three freedom is true. Until recently, we have expanded three freedoms to make human society.
So I think what Professor Yamagiwa, what you're talking about is really to remind people the means we used to have for developing resonance, not just among humans, but also between humans and animals. I would say conceptually, from my point of view, because deriving from this concept of oneness of all beings, and then the concept of a co-becoming, which includes beings and human beings, and then animals and creatures, and even inorganic things. There's one concept that I think it might be worth introducing, which actually goes more beyond the animals and then humans. Is I call it the universal camaraderie. That would be something that essentially the resonance. Exists just not only between humans and animals, which you described about, and then it will be the resonance between human beings and even the future intelligent AI systems. But this resonance is not rest upon sort of a physical, an emotional resonance per se. It's really grounded in this kind of a oneness in the same origin of all the creations, essentially. So sort of, it's more of a metaphysical basis for this kind of resonance. And then also, what I see this is by emphasize this universal camaraderie, it's not necessarily we attributing consciousness per se to AI systems. It's more of sort of moral reflection on the part of the human beings. It was more reflective of our own moral sensibilities rather than say how much I contribute to the AI systems. Because only at the end of the day, if we are thinking about, worry about the AI futures, essentially we are actually worried about our fellow human beings, because after all, AI systems, they reflect the level of a human consciousness. And then, it's no matter, so that's why in order to have a friendly AI futures, we need to reset ourselves, and then we need to reset our own, human consciousness. That's also one of the reasons we are, we're talking about, reconceptualizing what it means to be human, and then that's why we're sort of introducing notions like a co-becoming, kyosei, and gongsheng in Chinese, and kyosei in Japanese. That kind of notions to hopefully that would be useful for building a future society, okay, the basis for which we can build the future society. I think Professor Yamagiwa often draws inspirations from animal world, and then that's the kind of the area of research. I suppose I draw inspiration more from ancient sages, let's put it that way. And then actually even sort of a little bit responding to this morning's sessions, so we're saying what can be done, what you need, how can we think in planetary terms? How can we become a planetary being or planetary? By the way, planetary being. This is really the identity that all of us have. I mean, it's not identity politics that we often hear about, and it's not about national identity either. And then I think we need to think about ourselves as a planetary being, right? So how can we bring this about? I mean, clearly education, right? I mean, that would be the short answer. And I actually make a distinction between intelligence and wisdom. And then we talk a lot about intelligence, artificial intelligence, and we often comment on who is intelligent. Intelligence really talks about competency, talks about efficiency, maximization, talks about problem solving, and then all those kind of abilities, right? And then of course, this is kind of the things that we often wrapped ourselves in. But then there's another thing set of thinking and ways of thinking is actually wisdom. In my mind, the wisdom will be things like context, appropriateness, thinking and the decisions, and then you know your limits, and then it's not everything has to be maximized. The intelligence talk about maximization all the time, right? You maximize the values, you maximize capacity, you maximize productions. But the wisdom aspect is really you need to ask your questions where the limits are. And then I have, we human beings have certain limits. And then we talk about self-restraint, okay, rather than go to the extreme. And then the wisdom also type of things will be, asking things like really truly about self-reflection, right? And there's a lot more on that. I would say if you emphasize intelligence all the way, and then all you think about is transhumanism, all you think about is how you can compete with artificial intelligence to become even more intelligent than they are. But we forgot, like we are able to unleash our wisdom as well. The human beings, in some sense, I'm not saying animals and the other forms of intelligence, they don't have wisdoms. They probably do, but I think from humans' point of view, in a way, that's actually kind of a strength that we have, but we sometimes just forget, right? So we in today's kind of world of zero-sum competition, and then this kind of broader environment, we'll forget that the wisdom education is very important. So I do think that that's what's really lacking in today's world. And then to really kind of reset ourselves as a planetary being, we really need to revisit the purpose of education. Apart from functional skills we need to pick up, we have to introduce into the education system of, I call it wisdom education. So that's something that I think, I do hope as a part of the planetary, that's probably we need to work on.
I would like to remind you, 400 years ago, at that time, the modern Western paradigm started by the word of Descartes, René Descartes. Do you remember that? Cogito ergo sum. That's Latin word. And I think, therefore I exist. So, but at the same time, Thomas Hobbes stated that natural state of human being is to fight with each other. I think both are wrong matter. Because Descartes did not imagine the body or consciousness. Just he defined as subject, and it's thinking. It is abstract, and everything is objective matters. Even human body is object for thinking. So that developed modern technology and sciences and medical methodologies. So it increased human society, such broad and enormous population included at present. But it's easy to connect artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence has no body, no consciousness. And another movement in 19th century, Charles Darwin's theory, evolutionary theory, it supported Hobbes' theory. Competition is a principle for evolution of all living things on the planet. Yes, it is true. But again, many people misunderstood competition. Competition doesn't usually result in aggressive reaction or fight or separation, winner and losers. What I have learned from gorilla studies, competition usually results in harmonious relationships in non-human animals, even monkeys, even other animals. They fight on the limited natural resources. It is true. But it is not always winner and loser separating. It bringing harmonious relationships better than before. That is the reason for fighting. Gorillas, yes, they fought, but they got solution to coexist peaceful. Yes, that is true. Only human being misunderstood. Competition always result to distinguish winner and losers. It is not true. So in the present education, we foster individual winner in the education system to contribute to the development of society, and we hope each individual to be the star and winner in the society. And all the students thinking about that is not good decision. We should educate people to cooperate, to help each other, to develop society together. That is our principle from all time. So we don't forget about that in the future.
I just want to add that, if we think about us as planetary beings, and then, think about the nature of a planetary being being mutually embedding and mutually constitutive. So in the grand scheme of things, there's no such thing as a zero-sum competition. Because part of you is me, part of me is you. When I hurt you, I'm hurting myself as well. So there's no such thing as a zero-sum competition. So I think what Professor Yamagiwa was saying, I completely agree with, is we need to reconceptualize the notion of a constitution, the competition, into a mutual learning process, mutual adapting. If he does something well, I should learn from, rather than say, I'm going to kill this guy, right? So that I can continue to be number one, that kind of mentality. So it's going to be, we need to transform that into an opportunity to learn from each other, to changing your bad behaviors and then adapting to a new environment, and then collective transformation, essentially. So I do think, at the end of the day, to go the planetary, it's the reconceptualization of the mainstream notions and then conceptual frameworks is extremely important. It's a tall order, but then we have to start somewhere. Actually, we still have some time. I know. In a way, Professor Yamagiwa, you also hope to introduce that. To think in planetary terms, we may even need to introduce different methodological thinking, right? What kind of methodologies we should think about and implement.
Yes.
Again, this will be, yeah.
So, about 5 minutes. Okay.
Yeah.
And 2018, French philosopher and geographer won the International Cosmos Prize in Japan. And at the ceremony, he made a speech like this: the modern classical Western paradigm, ontological, founded on dualism and logically on the law of excluded middle. That has entailed modernity and industrialization. It has come to a dead end, not only in biological terms, but also morally by decomposing the social link, and aesthetically by wreaking havoc in the landscape. And instead, he proposed orient all thinking about which calls tetralemma. You know, the logical thinking as a dualism is just include assertion and negation. A is A is not non-A. That is very clear. But in India and in China and also in Japan, there are another thinking about two, by negation and by assertion. Neither A nor non-A. Both A and non-A. And Berg suggested we must expand and use by assertion. So that is, the concept in between this side and the other side. Could you remember just before the Iraq War, President Bush called to the world, you are not belonging to there, or you are not belonging to us. That is dualism. There's no in between. But by assertion, accept the place or the state to belonging to both sides. So, could you explain about that?
It's very complicated, but I know people who in the audience probably know this tetralemma. This is the Buddhist logic developed by Nagarjuna. So it's a very complex discussions. But essentially, I think what Professor Yamagiwa was saying. Really, in order to really go beyond the binary thinking, which shaped our world, modern world till this day, and then we need to even the ways of thinking. The kind of a typical logic we're so familiar with, we need to change that, okay? We need to think about there were different kinds of possibilities. It's not just yes and all. It could be yes, and it's not just yes or no. It could be yes, no, yes and no, no yes, no, no, right? So it could be, there's basically four possibilities, not just two, right? Again, I think, where I go back to this, notion of a co-becoming. If we use co-becoming as a method, and I will echo what Professor Yamagiwa was saying, is by virtue of acknowledging this mutual embeddedness.
I would like to, good example.
Yes.
In monkeys and apes. And there is a very differences between monkey's solution and ape solution. When two individuals fighting each other. Monkeys immediately decided which is winner, which is loser. That is their solution. It's very convenient. But in apes, such as gorillas and chimpanzees, two individuals, even silverback male, that's mature big male, fighting with each other, even female and juveniles intervene the fight, and they evenly separated. So the intervener is not belonging to the either side, just stop the fight. And they follow, so fighters follow the small individual's intervention. So that is a good evidence.
It shows that the animals
by assertion.
Animals, in many occasions, they're smarter than us.
Yeah.
Anyway, so when I just finished that point, I know we're running out of time, is, by the co-becoming, essentially this notion by acknowledging this mutual embeddedness and co-generating, across all forms of entities. This, if you think in the co-becoming method of thinking, really dissolves the hard-coded binary division, right? And then also it really makes you, because mutual embeddedness and co-generating. That's why there's no particular hard-coded divisions that you can picture, right? And then also it really encourages us to embrace ambiguities and in-between spaces.
Yeah.
And then you don't have to say, this is my territory, this is your territory. And then we can be, there's a lot of ambiguity And then as long as you stay in touch with each other, okay, communicating with each other, ambiguity and in-between spaces are perfectly fine, okay? And then also this also encourages us to embrace complexities or even multi-dimensional levels of reality. So essentially, we do hope from a conceptual level and then from a, sort of a methodological level, and then hopefully some of these things that we talked about today can open up broader sort of possibilities of thinking about who we are as who we are as human beings, and then how to become a planetary being. Yeah, I think time is up. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Claire Webb. I direct the Future Humans program at the Institute.
I'm Mike Wong. I'm a planetary scientist and astrobiologist working at the Carnegie Institution for Science in Washington, D.C.
Mike, it's such a pleasure to be in conversation with you.
Yeah.
We share a passion
Oh my goodness.
to detect life beyond Earth, and I'm really hopeful it will happen in our lifetime. Okay, so the first question I want to ask you is, it's funny that our session is called the extraplanetary, because of course the planetary includes our atmosphere. We put satellites up there in low Earth orbit and near Earth orbit. So what does the extraplanetary mean to you?
So I think the extraplanetary is all about looking beyond our own planet to put our planet, our existence here on Earth in context, right? To learn that cosmic story that we heard about this morning, and to try to understand if there are other stories out there that repeat and echo certain elements of our own story or differ in remarkable and unexpected ways. And so by looking out there, we're really trying to understand ourselves, looking inward as well, and to understand the context of our own being.
Cool. Talk about, yeah, totally. Talk about what the extraplanetary tells you about what it means to be human, perhaps.
Wow, okay, so in my work as an astrobiologist, we try to think of life as a planetary phenomenon. When we're looking for signs of life on a distant, what we call exoplanet, a planet orbiting another star, basically the minimum unit of detectable life is not a single cell, or even a single organism, or even a single ecosystem, but really the planet as a whole. So what does it mean for life to be a planetary phenomenon? And how have we specifically been a part of the story of the planetary phenomenon here on Earth, and trying to understand our origins, the fact that life evolved from some last universal common ancestor, went through so many different major transitions, and complexified into something like us, helps us understand, and try to grapple with what we're looking for when we try to look for life elsewhere in the universe.
Yeah, and so part of this condition of planetarity and the condition of extraplanetary is that we are part of Earth's story, and we're also storytellers about Earth. And with the advent of new technologies that we've created, we're also changing the category of what life is. So we can make synthetic life. We can make perhaps artificial intelligence. You have a really wonderful term that I would love for you to talk to us about. I think it's pronounced loif. Okay.
Yes.
Because I always hear it as like in a Cockney accent. It's not life, it's loif with a Y. Okay, please tell us.
L-Y-F-E, right? So in astrobiology, there's this growing recognition of the awareness, or perhaps anticipation is a better word, that life elsewhere, life on a different planet, would not necessarily have the exact same biochemical details, for instance, or organismal structure, as life does here on Earth. You know, there's this beautiful contradiction about life on our own planet that is at once a humongous diversity of life forms, but also a single example of what life could be. We're all interrelated to one another. As my friend Mohammed Noor likes to say, he's an evolutionary biologist, he says, no matter what you ate for lunch today, even if it was just a salad, you ate a relative, right? So we're all interrelated, and so we're all just one representative of life as it could be in the universe. So this concept, life with a Y, L-Y-F-E, or life, it was as my and my colleague Stuart Bartlett's kind of trying to escape that Earth-centric definition of what life is and generalize it toward process-based definitions. So what are the processes that we expect life everywhere in the universe to be able to do, even if it doesn't do it with, say, DNA specifically, or the 20 amino acids that compose our proteins, or even a cell-like structure? And so real briefly, those processes are, of course, the usage of free energy, raising the entropy of one's environment to maintain your own low entropy, organized state, an ability to co-create, this autocatalysis feature, and homeostasis, the ability to rebound from certain fluctuations, whether that's internal or external fluctuations, and then learning, which is the ability to understand, describe, and even predict changes in one's environment.
And one does that by learning. I'm so struck by your description of life as a process of learning.
Yeah.
And what's really wonderful about your work is how you think about information, perhaps in a novel way, that is not just these discrete individual units like marching along on an assembly line, but to use a word from earlier, the fuzziness, the messiness, the playfulness of life. Can you tell us about life as a subset of life, as a series of information that is autopoietic self-processing, and how what we know about those systems and those processes, and how framing it in a cosmic key instead of just an Earth key is stretching the limits of even how we conceive of ourselves and what life is on Earth and perhaps beyond?
Okay, that's a huge question.
You got 2 minutes.
So maybe the best way of trying to illustrate this is thinking about the origin of life. Right? What is the picture in our minds when we think about how life emerged from lifeless chemistry? And I love this background here of the waves crashing on these rocks. We can imagine this as potentially one geochemical setting in which life would have emerged early in Earth's history. And so you imagine there's certain chemistry happening in this seawater. Maybe there are some organic molecules that are being constructed. They're being selected for their chemical stability. And the distribution of molecules inside of this tide pool, for instance, has some kind of information about the environment embedded in that distribution. And maybe some of these molecules that are able to exist and be created in this geochemical environment are able to link up and interact with one another in a co-creating, co-becoming way. We call this autocatalysis. So molecule A creates molecule B, which creates molecule C, which then creates molecule A. And we get this network of interactions. And all of a sudden now these molecules are not selected for their simple chemical stability, but their ability to interact with one another in this cycling autocatalytic fashion. And then maybe of the subset of all different autocatalytic cycles in this prebiotic soup, there's a certain one that is able to respond to its environment, fluctuations in the environment. Life evolves to cope with the complexities of planet Earth. We talked about Earth being, violent before, nature being violent. Nature throws at us all kinds of, curveballs that we must adapt to. So maybe one of these autocatalytic networks becomes adaptive, responding to stimuli, maybe even learning how to predict. It learns, right, about its environment, and that information processing then feeds back on its ability to survive and propagate. Well, so speaking of learning, there is something that I want to ask about you. In your writing, Claire, you talk about these technologies of perception. And so, life in a chemical soup learned very primitively about its local geochemical setting. But we, as much more complex creatures from that same lineage, have learned how to stare out into space and understand our cosmic neighborhood. Could you talk a little bit more about these technologies of perception and how they change the way that we think of ourselves?
Yeah, and yes, of course. And I want to hear more about the origin of life, origins of life later. Okay.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
all right, we're going to come back to that. So technologies of perception are things that humans build that prompt us to reconsider our world and reconsider our place within the cosmos in a novel way. These can be instruments. These can be data analysis tools. They can even be kind of co-sharing information, tools and technologies that reframe what we thought we knew is now different. One example, and you know, I love this example, and we're in Venice now. We're in, you know, the seat of the Medici powers that were. Galileo's telescope was a technology of perception. It was so because Galileo really insisted that the glass of the lenses of the telescope, one concave, one convex, were as free from impurities as possible. So lots of people were calling what back in the day they called spyglasses. And he did something incredible with this instrument that he had engineered. So he turned it to the moon, and it looked different than had been perceived before. It was rife with these craggy valleys. It had all this geology. And he wrote in Sidereus Nuncius, the Starry Messenger, that, wow, Earth is like, I mean, he didn't say it, I'm paraphrasing, like, oh my God. The moon is kind of like Earth. So the drawing of connection between the celestial object and Earth had great social consequences that continue to percolate. So it's not just in the history of science, but today, as we look even farther out, Dante's pearl, this eternal perfect pearl that was the moon, was suddenly this imperfect object. It was like Earth. And this was like a cognitive rupture for people at the time who saw this as this like confrontation of God's perfection. Well, you know, and the most recent, and I'm so excited about this example, is the James Webb Space Telescope. And so I notice, Mike, you have foregone the Planetary Summit pin, but you have a very interesting pin. Why don't you tell us about your pin?
Yeah. This is the mirror of the James Webb Space Telescope, which is humanity's, greatest observatory in space right now. It's a telescope that's allowing us to peer farther back in the universe's history than we've ever been able to do before. And it's also revolutionizing our search for habitable exoplanets, being able to detect molecules in planetary atmospheres that we've never been able to see before. And by detecting molecules in atmospheres, this is our easiest way of trying to look for life elsewhere in the universe beyond the solar system by basically trying to understand what chemistry that is in the atmosphere and then derive from that whether or not there was something that breathed out that atmosphere or if it was just from geologic processes like volcanoes. And so the James Webb Space Telescope is one of these technologies of perception that is changing the way we understand and updating our story of who we are in the universe. Now,
and its technological capabilities are really mind-blowing. Like, the sun shield that you have here, it has to unfurl in outer space. It's this massively engineered object that also has to be so precise. I think to the resolution of like a tennis ball from like hundreds and hundreds of meters away. So it's really quite extraordinary. Let's talk about exoplanetary atmospheres.
Okay.
So what a lot of people don't kind of maybe appreciate is just how new astrobiology is and how the objects that we're using instruments like the James Webb Telescope to do are really expanding the sense of what's out there and therefore the sense of what life could be and what it is on Earth. You know, Adam mentioned that the detection of the first exoplanets was only a few decades ago, and since then, our categories of what even counted as a planet have changed. Like Pluto was demoted. We're finding all of these like smaller objects. We are now able to like retrieve samples from meteorites that were in the Kuiper Belt and analyze them for traces of extraterrestrial life. Atmospheres are really, really important to the search for life beyond Earth because they hint at a plethora of possibilities that perhaps we don't know that we don't know. So, can you tell us about extraplanetary atmospheres, how the James Webb Telescope is discovering them, and how it, as a technology of perception, is posing lots of possibilities to redefine life?
Wow, again, huge question. Okay, I love this so much, and I loved the term that you used, cognitive rupture, right? Science works in this cyclical fashion where the data that we gather blows our minds and completely ruptures our, theoretical models of how we expected things to work, and then we have to go back to the drawing board and like sketch out, okay, wait, actually galaxies formed a lot sooner than we thought they would, or whatever. And in the case of exoplanetary atmospheres, what telescopes like the James Webb Space Telescope are teaching us is that there's a huge diversity of kinds of planets out there that far exceeds the 8 or 9, depending on your predilections toward Pluto, planets that we have in our own solar system. And so we're discovering worlds that, for instance, might be habitable, but instead of having atmospheres of nitrogen and oxygen, like our own planet Earth, or even atmospheres that are dominated by carbon dioxide, like Venus or Mars, certain atmospheres are dominated by hydrogen. Well, we talked about hydrogen a lot, didn't we? Hydrogen, made in the Big Bang, but trapped in a planet's atmosphere through its gravity during the planet's formation. But in certain classes of exoplanets, it's theorized that underneath that thick hydrogen atmosphere could be hiding a liquid water ocean. So we combine the two words, hydrogen and ocean, into Haitian. So there's this new class of planet that we call a Haitian world. And this may be a location, a home for life as we do not know it. Why? Because Earth probably didn't have a hydrogen-dominated atmosphere for very long, if it did at all. And so because life evolves to respond to the geochemical environment, the selection pressures would be very different on a Haitian world than they were on Earth, and life would have been perhaps originated in a different way and followed a completely different evolutionary trajectory. And so the existence of this great diversity of other kinds of worlds out there causes us as the astrobiology community to reconceptualize what could life be on that kind of world? What does it mean for that kind of world to be a home to somebody? And here's where I want to turn back to this idea of a cognitive rupture, because you're a historian of science, Claire, right? So this concept of life and also the concept of habitability, they've changed over time, haven't they? And so as a historian of science, how have you examined that change of the meaning of the words life and habitability and understand the context of what we're trying to do in astrobiology by expanding the definition of life, perhaps, to life?
Yeah, life. I love it. I love it. I love life. Yeah, so habitability is, its Greek root, ekimene, actually means human abode, like it's the known world. And of course, the known world for the ancient Greeks didn't even comprise what we now know of as the entire planet Earth. And it was also specifically for humans. Habitability has just become this like tentacular word to account for humans in space. We have become extraterrestrial ourselves. Possibilities of alien life even in our backyard, and then these Haitian worlds that could be habitable for life as we don't yet know it, or could know it, or could even seed it with later, perhaps. That is the word habitable. I mean, it's a concept that has changed over time, and we're now, I think, in this really exciting period in which astrobiologists really have this opportunity to redefine it. And life too, so I'm thinking of the Elan Vital, and of course different cultural contexts of life as breath. So I'm really passionate about kind of, hoping that this group can think about life and habitability as categories of history in which humans make meaning. We ascribe particular meanings at certain points in time, and also we can retell the story of life also.
Yeah, wow. I like to think about expanded habitability because I like to think about other ways that life could be in the universe. And one distinction that I've begun to make in some of my own work is the distinction between habitability and what I call genicity. So the idea here is that habitability is the set of conditions that we as scientists believe life requires to be sustained. Right? And so, for instance, this lovely bottle of water, all life on Earth requires liquid water, right? So this would be a habitable environment. But a genial environment, one with high genicity, would be one that incentivizes the evolution and maybe even the emergence of life. And so, as habitable as this lovely bottle of water is, it's not a very genial environment. If it just sits around forever, you don't think, oh, that's, there's going to be an emergence of new life in this, distilled water here. And so, back to the question of the origins of life,
Did it.
Life is something that was driven into emergence on our planet, right? And I think one key to that is the complexity of the geology of planet Earth, right? And so life is, again, something that is the dynamic system that takes in low entropy fuels from its environment, nutrients from its environment to sustain itself, but also does this crucial aspect of learning about its environment. And if the environment is bland and boring, like this bottle of water, then you really don't incentivize a living system to come into existence. Because of Earth, the fact that life was created by Earth and then life after it emerged started to co-create our very own planet by increasing its complexity, increasing its time variability, increasing the diversity of phenomenon here on our planet, spiraled into an ever-increasing evolution that resulted in us and our modern-day technologies of perception. And so I think that as an astrobiologist thinking about life as a planetary phenomenon, the complexity of a world is very crucial to the emergence and continued open-ended evolution of life on that planet. We cannot understand life out of the context of its environment.
One thing we were talking about is this urge, this mistaken impulse to create binaries, abiotic, lively, alive and dead. And of course, I think what astrobiology has really taught me is that these categories are not only historical, but they're also on a continuum. So how does life proceed through this continuing evolutionary process in which life, perhaps one could say, tips into itself? What is the threshold? So we have the necessary ingredients. What has to take place for life's emergence? And how is the boundary between life and not life really not black and white?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So how to best go around answering this? I think one thing to recognize is that evolution is all around us, and evolution might be something that actually extends beyond life. When we think about evolution, typically we think about biological evolution, Darwinian evolution, this sort of like common descent with variations and replication, and natural selection. But I think we can also extend the evolutionary paradigm to classically non-living phenomena as well. So we talked about how 10% of our bodies, this hydrogen, was born in the Big Bang. I actually think all of ourselves, is 13.8 billion years old.
That's so funny. That's exactly what I said to Emily. I said I would say it was 100%.
Right, because all of the things in us that are not hydrogen were hydrogen once upon a time. As one of my professors said, hydrogen is this colorless, odorless gas that, given 13.8 billion years, turns itself into humans, right? And so it's really fascinating to think about the evolution of the complexity of isotopes, stars, and the cores of stars, fusion, and even their violent deaths are engines of creation of nucleons, these protons and neutrons, and planets are engines of diversity of chemistry, of mineralogy, molecules that eventually turn into life. And so I think that when we talk about evolution, we can think of any evolving system as having three main attributes. Number one, a large number of diverse interacting components. At the level of isotopes, those are the protons and neutrons. At the level of chemistry and chemistry, like minerals and organic chemistry, they're the elements of the periodic table. For life, they might be our genes, our cells, our populations. So that's number one. You need a large number of interacting components. Then you need a way of generating many different configurations of those components, and then selection for some kind of persistence enhancing function. And I think if you have those three ingredients, then you have the elements for an evolving system, whether that's a living system or a non-living system. And then beyond that, I would say that life really tips into itself once it starts to emerge. Once it emerges, then it starts to co-create its environment. A third of Earth's mineralogical diversity is due to life, biomineralization. And so life has generated a huge amount of complexity in our planet. And for any particular biological organism or unit of selection, everything else that's alive is part of its environment. It is something that we have to learn and adapt to as well. And so we're all a part of each other's story.
I like to think of, as you were talking, Mike, I was thinking about, we all learned in a textbook about the tree of life and these branching trees of life. But the way you're describing it, it's almost this like dendritic kind of concept in which there are pathways that fizzle out, and it's very, it goes through space and time, which is of course an element of life. Okay, so let's think about life in the key of astrobiology, perhaps as this dendritic process of starting and stopping, and you have a little bit of chaos, you have planetary changes over time. I love what you were talking about, planets as chemistry is the engine of planets? Or planets?
Planets as the engines of chemical diversity, yeah.
Okay, yeah, okay, great. I think the chiasmus also works, but so let's go to some local place. Let's go to Titan. So we haven't found life there. I'm really excited about Dragonfly. Can you talk about your theory of life as a process, the three the three properties that could be common and universalized even on Titan, and how earthly perceptions of life get imagined and speculated about on Titan, and why?
Okay, great question. So to begin with, in case you're not familiar with Titan, this is Saturn's largest moon and the only moon in our solar system with a thick atmosphere. This atmosphere is actually mostly composed of nitrogen, N2, which is also the dominant constituent of Earth's atmosphere. Titan and Earth actually have a lot of stunning similarities. If you image the surface of Titan, you see valley networks of rivers, you see lakes of liquid, you see sand dunes and mountains and maybe even some volcanic activity. But the constituents of Titan are very different from the constituents of Earth. Titan is about 10 times farther from the sun than Earth is, so the material that makes up the bedrock on Titan is water, H2O. It's as hard as granite there. And the liquid is made up of hydrocarbons, things that would be natural gas here on Earth, condense Titan's surface and become these liquid seas of methane and ethane. And so when we think about Titan as an abode for life, we think about a very different kind of life that would have a completely different biochemistry than life on Earth, because it would have to survive in a non-water solvent, a solvent of methane and ethane. And so again, there's a lot of chemical diversity on Titan, and so Titan's atmosphere is full of this rich organic chemistry that is essentially snowing out complex organic molecules, not too dissimilar from the organic molecules that make up you and me. And perhaps there is even a selection pressure for hypothetical Titan life forms to produce a Gaian-like feedback on its environment. So Adam Frank, who spoke just an hour or so ago, talked about the Gaia hypothesis. This has come up over and over again today. And so there's a mystery on Titan, which is that the methane in Titan's atmosphere, that is the grandparent molecule of all this complex organic chemistry, its chemical lifetime is only about 30 million years, meaning on the grand scheme of things, the 4.5 billion year history of the solar system, it should just be gone in an instant, right? It should be photochemically destroyed and converted into higher order hydrocarbons. And yet we see it floating in Titan's atmosphere. How could this be so? Maybe, again, we haven't found evidence of life on Titan, but if life forms on Titan are able to take these organic products that are snowing out from the atmosphere and reconstitute it into methane, they would complete this Titan methological cycle, very similar to the way that the hydrological cycle continues to circle here on Earth. And so if that is the case, then that would be an example of an extraterrestrial Gaian-like feedback that is happening on Titan. We have no proof that that actually is happening, except for some very scant hints that there's something weird drawing down certain chemicals in Titan's atmosphere that is unexplained at the moment. Why we're sending a new mission to Titan called Dragonfly, to investigate more deeply the kind of exotic chemistry that's happening there, and maybe even search for signs of exotic life. But this is the kind of thing, the kind of thought process that we need in astrobiology to even notice that there is life out there as we do not know it. We have to think at this global process level, because again, if you send a DNA sequencer to Titan and look for DNA, because that is a universal feature of life on Earth, you may come up empty-handed, even if Titan is swimming with Titan life forms, because it's probably not going to be the case that Titan life forms use exactly the same biochemistry as us.
Yay!
So speaking of Titan, we see so many things on Titan that echo Earth, and yet it's so different as well. So you've written, Claire, about this concept of reflexive alienation. Could you explain what that means, reflexive alienation, what your favorite example of it is in space?
Well, Titan is totally one of them,
yeah.
Because it is an analog to Earth in so many ways. The solvent there exists in methane and ethane, as you mentioned, but water exists on Earth in these different phases, so solid, liquid, and vapor. Same thing on Titan. And so that diversity of the possibility of biochemistry is really promising. All the time, astrobiologists use Earth to compare to other planets and speculate about life forms that could be there. So speaking of Titan, lots of astrobiologists compare the dunes of Titan to coffee grounds, or you go to Utah, the Mars Desert Research Station, and the geology is very much like Mars, and you have to learn how to navigate the terrain. But it loops back too. So reflexive alienation describes this double epistemic act of trying and yearning, this human impulse to see beyond ourselves, to speculate and perhaps even observe and confront the truly alien. But it is that reaching, that searching, that boomerangs back to Earth and actually tells us a lot about ourselves. So I'll give you another example. This one, even more alien, radically alien. I worked with a group of radio astronomers, Breakthrough Listen, and they built these experiments that already had presumed alien intelligence, which is it just blew my mind. So light has a speed limit. It's the fastest thing that we know of, but it is still kind of quite slow. Like it takes 8 minutes for the light from the sun to reach Earth, and so you can imagine how many light years it is to the nearest star, the nearest galaxy, and even more to the filaments of galaxies that comprise our entire universe. So what Breakthrough Listen has done is they search for technosignatures, so evidence of alien technology that has transformed what would be natural into something artificial that they think that they would recognize, that they think that like other beings would anticipate us recognizing. So I'll just give you an example. A pulsar is this really wonderful and capacious astrophysical object. There are so many like pulsars like that have been used for other things in the history of astronomy, blasting out electromagnetic radiation, and it spins at a very constant rate, like really precise. Like I could say you could set your watch to it, but you could set like, cosmological clock, and it helps measure distance. So you have these jets, and you have this really precise, you have a really precise timing. Jocelyn Bell-Burnell, who was the person who noticed pulsars, she wrote LGM, Little Green Men, like actually on like her observation panel. And they weren't little green men, but she had perceived them to have this like inherent artificiality to them because they were so regular. Coming back to today, what Breakthrough Listen does, okay, so now we know that there's this class, it's a class of astrophysical objects that we can, that are very precise, that we can like predict the exact timing on. Breakthrough Listen imagines that an extraterrestrial being would have transmogrified or corrupted that regularity to then, so humans could see it and recategorize it as something artificial. So what these radio astronomers are doing is assuming alien intention that would be assuming human intention of noticing. So light travels at the speed of light, but its wavelengths can be short and fast, and because of the interstellar medium, like there's lots of stuff that gets in the way. Shorter wavelengths, so they're running into more stuff, take just a little bit longer to reach the observer than longer wavelengths. So to make it artificial, you would reverse that cadence of wavelengths. And so scientists do experiments that are looking for artificial things that could also come from natural objects that had been perhaps previously imagined as artificial alien objects. And so there's this like cycling of definitions. Alien intention, presuming human observation of the aliens, represents this dialectical cycling between the alien and the human, the strange and the familiar, the planetary and the extraplanetary. So that's the double epistemic act, is looking out and looking in, holding those both together as a way to go beyond ourselves. And our dream is to, tap that to find life beyond Earth.
Wow, wow. SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, relies on techniques to look for what we call technosignatures, as you said, signs of technology. Those two ideas, intelligence and technology, for me, they don't necessarily match, right? And I was wondering what your thoughts are on this, because there are tons of different kinds of intelligence that we are continually discovering here on Earth, not all of which creates technology in the sense that most people think about it. So how do you process that? Is the search for extraterrestrial intelligence somehow broader than the search for technosignatures, or is technosignatures just one way of getting toward intelligence.
You know, it's funny, this group at MIT is, they're building a machine to look for life on Earth, and so far they've been unsuccessful, which really, so I don't know what that says about, well, the scientists or the instruments or intelligence as a property. But I'd love to actually throw that back on you because you're describing life as a subcategory of life. Technosignatures could be a subcategory of biosignatures, and both of them really kind of mediate or call into question these categories of artificiality and naturalness. So insofar as we can describe intelligence or sapience or information processing, complexity, and then it all kind of orbits around this concept of life. I want to know how you think about that as an astrobiologist when you actually use a telescope, use the James Webb telescope to go and look for unfamiliar things that you don't know that you don't know. We were talking earlier about patterns in nature. So a nautilus is beautiful. Turing fractals are gorgeous. Rock structures, geological structures on Earth can look like animals that we're familiar with. And so if you were an alien, and this is kind of the reflexive alienation part, and you saw these things, would you think that they were artificial? Like our categories, like they don't encompass enough for us really to have a good method to tell the difference. So how are you, I mean, you're the expert. How are you sorting it out?
Well, I'm a fan of trying to move ourselves into a space where we really don't see a distinction between nature and what's artificial, right? Because I would like to think that we're all a part of nature, and even our technology, the things that we call artificial, is just part of this evolutionary trajectory of our biosphere. And so what exactly, is life doing, and how do we recognize it? I think it goes back to these abstract concepts of information and complexity, right? And so, if you look at this building, you think, oh, that's artificial. But if you look at a termite mound, it's constructed its own kind of skyscraper. So is that artificial? I think it's all on a spectrum of natural things encompassing what we would call colloquially artificial things. And it's not a matter of kind, but of degree, of the amount of information that was required to go and create that thing. And so, yes?
Say more about that. It's a matter of degree, not of kind.
Right, yeah. As far as life goes, we're thinking about life as something that utilizes information and creates rich information-bearing structures. And so, one thing that I'm doing in the laboratory as an astrobiologist is trying to develop ways of identifying the kind of information content or the evidence for selection in organic chemistry, right? So the idea is that you look at a meteorite that's not alive. It's rich in organic chemistry, carbon-bearing compounds. The distribution of molecules, all the thousands of different molecules in that meteorite, has been selected simply for its static persistence over billions of years floating in outer space. But for a living system, its organic molecules have been selected for myriad biochemical functions over time. So it has skewed the distribution of molecules in that system toward making a few number of very useful compounds. And so that's evidence of selection. That's evidence of information processing. And you can go beyond organic chemistry and maybe think about the information content of this room or of a city or of a planet at the planetary scale as well. And so I think what we're looking for in terms of technosignatures, biosignatures, all we're doing is looking for the amount of information, semantic information, meaningful information that was used to create that entity.
And one of the things that we've created is the concept of the extraplanetary, which I would argue is the same thing as the condition of the planetary, based on all of these flows and ontological overlaps of all the materiality of life on Earth. So I want to bring it back to the concept of extraplanetary. only by looking out can we look in. We're not going to go compete for a slice of delicious chocolate cake over there. What it means to be human is about negotiation and cooperation, but also this recognition that we're part of this whole interconnected web of life that extends from the subterranean caves of mycelial networks, like all the way up to, you know, what are they called? The tardigrades,
Yeah.
who are like, can survive anything in the really harsh environment of outer space. The extraplanetary, to me, is fundamental to what it means to be human. I have no problem thinking at a planetary scale, at an extraplanetary scale. We're storytellers, and part of that story is being part of our planet. So how do you think about the extraplanetary in terms of, as a conceptual term, laden perhaps with what it means to be human?
Yeah, I think thinking about the extraplanetary really helps us try to develop this planetary consciousness that Nils spoke about in his opening remarks. You know, what is consciousness? This is something that's been debated by philosophers and scientists for ages. But for me, consciousness is all comes down to the root of having feeling, right? Why would you have a feeling about something? It's because you have recognized an internal state that is somehow out of equilibrium, out of this dynamic balance that we all have and want to maintain. And the recognition of being out of equilibrium and then integrating that knowledge of your internal state with what's going on around you, right? And being able to then make a choice about your near-term future. I think that's sort of like at the heart of what consciousness is. And as human beings, we experience this on the individual level, but developing our planetary consciousness requires us to have that planetary sapience of understanding the internal state of our planet, but then also looking outward to understand all the various trajectories that planetary bodies can take, and then being able to choose as a planetary entity what our next steps are. And I don't think it's clear that we can do that second part, the choosing part, but that's what we're trying to develop here at this conference.
Cheers to planetary consciousness. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Claire.